Welcome to the latest episode of Spotlight on, MIT Technology Review's series on technology's impact on our world. This is Spotlight on Election Security, pretty timely. My name is Patrick Howell O'Neill. I'm the Senior Editor for Cybersecurity at MIT Technology Review. I'm here with Brandon Wales, Executive Director at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Thanks for being here, Brandon. Welcome.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to the entire MIT Technology Review team for putting on a extremely timely event on obviously a topic that is of critical importance to me and to our agency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talk about timely. The vote's already begun. I cast my ballot already, and so have over 6 million Americans, according to the Election Project. So that means from now until Election Day, and frankly beyond Election Day, the focus is on the integrity and security of the 2020 election. That's an enormous topic. CISA literally just hosted a 5-ish hour event about it yesterday. A really good event. So we're going to have to pick and choose what we dive into here. Let's start with the most visible recent work CISA has been putting out into the world. So your team has been releasing this month a slate of PSAs and information that all circle back in one way or another to issues of election disinformation and voter confidence. So the PSAs have touched on things like mail-in voting, post-election and election result processes, security measures in place to safeguard elections. But to take a bird's eye view for a moment, what I want to ask is why the focus on disinformation and voter confidence? You know, what makes this so important right now that it's clearly a major priority for your team? Or maybe to flip that question, to put a finer point on it, what's the threat that you see posed by election disinformation right now, so close to Election Day?
Sure, and I think I'll come at this at two angles. On the one hand, we have spent the last 4 years working with state and local election administrators to enhance the security and resilience of the infrastructure that operates our democratic processes. And we are confident that the work that we have done and the work largely done by state and local officials has had a measurable impact. That being said, and the second angle is what we see our adversaries doing is attempting to sow discord in our country by potentially using disinformation related to the election processes, whether it's on mail-in voting, whether it's on the overall trust in the system. And so ultimately, the last line of defense is the resilience of the American voter. And so we felt very strongly with the FBI and across the United States government that we needed to talk directly to the American people to ensure that, one, they knew that the work that the United States government had done had created real security improvements in our election infrastructure, but that they are an important part. They have a role to play in the overall resilience of our system. And part of that is not being susceptible to efforts by our adversaries to feed them disinformation. And so we worked on, kind of, as you said, a slate of different topics and how our adversaries could potentially exploit divisions in our society. And we hope that the American people are listening.
Let's talk about COVID for a moment. Well, we're going to get back to disinformation shortly, no doubt. But can you talk about, since the pandemic began, how has it changed the problem of election security, and how has it changed CISA's job this year?
I think that's a great question, and it highlights what I will say is the underlying infrastructure we've built to create an election security community that didn't exist 4 years ago. It didn't exist when the Russians first attempted to compromise our election infrastructure in 2016, but it exists today. So very shortly after the outbreak of COVID, CISA, along with the Election Assistance Commission, formed a joint COVID working group with representatives from across our country, made up of the state and local election officials and the technology companies that support them, to talk through how will COVID change our election processes, and what do we need to do to provide additional guidance and additional mechanisms by which state and local election officials can mitigate any new risks that are created. What we've seen is states adopting a variety of different approaches to their elections as a result of COVID. Some have moved to expand vote by mail, either through loosening absentee rules or to expanding direct provisioning of ballots to all registered voters in the states. Other states have decided to reduce the number of polling locations and to create kind of super centers where they can space people out more and reduce the likelihood of congestion on election day. Some have changed some rules related to early voting. And we've tried to meet each of those states where they are based upon the decisions that they're making that they believe are in the best interest of their citizens. What kind of advice would be useful? And what we've overall seen is not necessarily that there's more risk, but that risks are shifting around. So whereas before a state may have had complete control over large portions of their election infrastructure, now some of that risks are shifting. Maybe more of that risk is shifting on United States Postal Service. Maybe more of it is shifting to the people who are the companies that deal with ballot mailing, stuffing and mailing operations. And so I try to identify each of those places where new risks may be manifesting and what states can do to potentially manage those risks, reduce them, have better insight, and ultimately ensure that we've got a smoother election.
So one COVID specific threat, you could say, so let me start here. CISA has a slogan for voters, which is pretty nice and memorable: prepare, participate, patience. The last P, patience, has been a topic that's been repeated by you and your colleagues constantly, right? Which is the idea that we might not know the outcome of our election on November 3rd, and that's going to require patience from voters, and patience potentially in the face of foreign actors seizing on the delays in the reporting of election results, spreading disinformation, undermining confidence. Can you talk about, first of all, why that threat, that possibility exists this year, and what CISA's role is if that kind of disinformation materializes?
Sure. So, I think the short answer is the changes that COVID has created that state and local officials have implemented as a result of COVID are intersecting with the legacy laws on the books. So, for example, as states moved to expand mail-in voting by mail, they haven't necessarily changed all the procedures of their state. So, for example, some of the Midwest states can't start counting mail-in ballots until the day of the election. Actually, a small number of states can't start counting mail-in ballots until elections, the polls close in those states. So because you're going to see a huge uptick in absentee voting in those states, coupled with that they can't start actually tallying those mail-in votes. And in some cases, because votes may be able to be accepted under those state laws as long as they're postmarked by election day, we are likely to see delays in the processing of the election. Now, the truth is, and we've tried to convey this to the American people, is that this process doesn't necessarily change when the election is official. Everything you hear about on election day is unofficial results. Newscasters often say that, but it's not something that I think the American people have fully kind of internalized. And so the vote is not done until the votes are certified. The election is certified by that state's chief election official, usually their Secretary of State, which often comes several weeks after the election, but varies based upon state law. So we're likely to see delays. The unofficial results may not be available on election night in some places, not all, because there are places where they're going to start counting those mail-in ballots early, and we may not see significant delays. But there will be some places. They could be in some crucial swing states, and so we may not have results election night knowing who's the winner. We've tried to encourage people to not be concerned about that. That is normal. That doesn't mean the process has been compromised. It just means the system is working the way it is. And local and state officials who are professionals, let them do their jobs. I think our role is going to be a couple of fold. First is trying to correct disinformation that gets out there as it relates to the election. So recent example, a couple of weeks ago, we had a Russian news site indicate that they had information that there was information on Michigan voters on the dark web. We very quickly were able to get access to that information, coordinated with the Secretary of State of Michigan, who made clear that the information was publicly available, as most state voter registration rolls are, and that there was no compromise of their state systems. So the Secretary of State put out a message making that clear, and then we issued a joint statement with the FBI reinforcing that point. I would say, secondly, it is to help provide the American people with the right context. Where should they go for trusted information? A lot of the work that CISA does is to help the American people understand where they could go for trusted sources of information related to the elections. And in almost all cases, that's likely to be their state and local election officials, who are the professionals who run these elections and who have a vested interest in making sure that the votes are counted and counted correctly. And third, it'll be working in support of our colleagues at the FBI and the intelligence community, who are on the lookout for foreign efforts to spread disinformation and to take action against them, whether it's working with social media companies to remove content from foreign malicious actors, or it's potentially directly addressing this through some of DoD's efforts to defend our nation forward. So we've got a multifaceted role, and I think we sit right at that kind of nexus point between what the United States government is going to do and ultimately what our state and local colleagues who are running the elections are doing.
What's the playbook if in addition or instead of foreign actors, it's domestic actors behind this kind of disinformation about the results? Is there any difference on your end?
So certainly there's some difference in what the United States government can do, because under the First Amendment, people have freedom of speech. So there's less that the broader U.S. government can do to provide information relating to takedowns and others. But social media companies might take action under their violations of their terms of service. What CISA is going to do, our role doesn't really change, because ultimately we're dealing with the demand side, trying to get to the American people and providing them the right way of evaluating information that they're seeing. Is the source trusted? Should we encourage people to think before they link, be smart about what you're posting and what you're reposting and what you're retweeting, and providing them that kind of context. And so ultimately we can do that, whether that information is coming from foreign or domestic sources, because at the end of the day, they should be trusting information from the right sources. And we're going to try to help make sure that the American people, through social media companies and others, know how to get in touch with the people who could provide them the most accurate information.
Gotcha. A minute ago, you mentioned voter registration database story. So to kind of zero in on how the explosion in vote by mail has changed the work of securing the election. So, and please correct me if anything I'm about to say is wrong, but it seems to me that, and this is something that CISA has said repeatedly, is securing voter registration databases takes on added importance during a pandemic, if for no other reason that people voting by mail won't have access to the same kind of provisional balloting process that people voting in person do if they've been left off voter rolls. So, DHS and FBI have said that Russia most likely conducted research and reconnaissance against election networks in all 50 states in 2016. So the first question I have here, in terms of activity targeting election IT and networks, including voter registration databases, what are you seeing this time around?
So we're not seeing any type of concerted effort by foreign nations or any other groups to target election infrastructure, the networks, the systems, the IT, the databases. What we are seeing is kind of opportunistic compromises of exploitable networks. So if you've got a vulnerability, an adversary who may be doing broad scans of networks looking for people who have unpatched systems, who haven't taken care of their VPN vulnerabilities, adversaries are looking for that. For the most part, those tend to be cyber criminal groups who are the ones who are most often taking advantage of those. But we are seeing nation states, in some cases, take advantage and compromise state and local networks. Again, not targeting election systems, but more broadly state and local networks. Now, that being said, a lot of state and local networks are a little too flat, a little too less. They don't have the degree of segmentation that we would like. And so once an adversary compromises a network, it is easier for them to kind of move laterally on those networks and get to other locations. So that's part of the effort that we've been doing, kind of working with state and local election officials to think about how they protect themselves, how they ensuring that they're patching against critical vulnerabilities. But for the most part, I think we are lucky this year that we are not seeing this kind of activity that we saw in 2016, certainly not at that scale by any group.
So to hang on this topic for just a moment, the threat to voter registration databases was crystallized in 2016, like you said, at a kind of an unprecedented scale. And I'm interested in juxtaposing 2016 to today in one way, which is there's an idea that states and localities should have multiple offline backups to deal with the case of attack. Are such backups widely available enough today, or do you think there's more work to do there?
So, I'll say a couple of things on this. To start, I think you're exactly right. I mean, we have pushed to say that the most at-risk parts of our election infrastructure are those places where you're going to have high degree of centralization and a high degree of internet connectivity. And so the two places that happens are voter registration databases and the election night reporting systems, the places that we, the media and elsewhere, we go to look at the results of the unofficial results on election night. And we have spent a lot of time encouraging states to build security and resilience around those systems. And you're exactly right. The primary source of resilience for voter registration databases, in addition to ensuring good network segmentation, in addition to having multi-factor authentication and patching your systems, is to have offline backups. We have seen a dramatic increase in this over the last 4 years. I think it is safe to say that the states are in much better shape now than they were 4 years ago. And even 4 years ago, the challenges that they faced were more manageable. There were a relatively small number of compromises, considering that they were up against a nation-state adversary who had done reconnaissance against all 50 states. But in addition to offline backups of the voter registration systems, there's other layers of security that we've encouraged them to build in. So this could include things like paper backups of e-poll books. So instead of to ensure that if you show up on election day and your e-poll book system is down, whether because of a malicious attack or more likely because of the traditional technology glitches that we face every year, that there's a way of ensuring people can still vote, in addition to things like provisional ballots, which are always available, to have a paper backup for any vote that's cast, and ultimately to do a risk limiting audit on the back end to provide an additional layer of security and resilience to the overall system. So we have seen states slowly moving in that direction across all 4 of those areas, and so we're extremely encouraged by that.
Let me take a minute to pivot to a question from a viewer, which is pretty interesting, I think. Have there been any threats detected against media organizations in terms of publishing election results, the potential aim being to sow doubt in the results? Is that something that you're looking at?
So that is something that we are worried about. And we've actually been meeting with some of the cybersecurity leadership at major news companies for the past several weeks to talk about some of these issues. In addition, I talked a little bit earlier about we've set up a lot of the infrastructure to build an election security community. One of those things was a council specifically made up of the technology companies, the vendors, in the private sector that support election infrastructure. The Associated Press has been a member of that council since the beginning because of this critical role that they play in providing information to all news agencies related to elections. They have stringers out in polling in tallying locations. So they have been part of this entire security apparatus for the past 4 years. In addition, CISA held a tabletop exercise with around 70 media officials 2 weeks ago, with the goal of understanding, 1, what are the threats they may face, and 2, how do we set shared expectations for communication before and after and on election day so that we can provide information very quickly and hopefully help to connect them to accurate, trusted sources of information before they run with something that may have been they may have seen on Twitter, which is not always validated and vetted information. So we are acutely aware that the media is a key part of this security ecosystem, and we are trying to ensure that they are connected into the process as much as possible. Again, there's a little bit more standoffish relationship because of the unique role media plays in our society, but we believe that they are a key player, and they need to be part of the solution.
So you mentioned the Associated Press, and at the risk of fleshing out a nightmare scenario, I think the immediate thing it brought up, the immediate incident was, I can't remember the year, it was during the Obama administration. You know, the AP Twitter account got hacked about a bomb going off, an explosion at the White House that temporarily tanked the stock market briefly. And obviously there has been, the security situation for verified Twitter accounts has not exactly been spotless since then. There was a big security incident at Twitter, moving forward. So there's a lot of questions that arise out of that. But I guess the first question I would ask is, are you working with the social media companies specifically to monitor and secure, not just, so the AP account itself is one thing, but even AP reporters or any verified reporters? Like how are you and the social media companies thinking about that problem?
So, there's limits to what I can say here, because we ultimately, social media companies are going to have to be the ones to understand how they manage their security profile of both verified and unverified users. I will say, based upon the feedback that we have seen after the most recent incident that Twitter faced, they made significant changes to their security architecture to avoid an incident like that happening again. But it is always possible. That was a particular, that was a compromise working through Twitter, but certainly you can compromise individual users, compromise their devices, et cetera. So, that is still going to be a possibility. And I think what we want to do is be able to spot things like that quickly and take the appropriate action in informing the American people of the truth and the accurate information about it.
Let me pivot to another group that has to worry about threats. So in 2016, maybe the most glaring cyber issue was campaign cybersecurity, the hack and leak operation that successfully and deliberately dominated headlines through Election Day. So let's take a moment to compare and contrast. Where are political campaigns today when it comes to cybersecurity compared to 2016? And can you talk a little bit about what the unique challenges are of securing a campaign versus securing, say, your standard Fortune 500 company?
Sure. And, I think one of the obvious challenges is that these are extremely temporal organizations. They stand up for a very short period of time and then they stand down. They've got lots of volunteers. They have lots of people coming into and out of the campaign. And so managing that security perimeter is a challenge. Now, I think here, both campaigns at the presidential level have realized that they are significant targets. We have, and the FBI has spoken to them significantly a number of times about this, obviously, and they have taken what we think is appropriate action. I think this is another place where the private sector has stepped up in a big way, in particular places like Google and Microsoft that offer services to the campaigns, providing them advanced levels of protection for their campaign operations. And so you've seen both Google and Microsoft over the past 60 days do public releases of information where they have seen nation state actors attempting to gain access to campaign-related infrastructure. And those efforts have largely not been successful, in part because of the enhanced level of security that have been provided, and also because the campaigns just take these issues more seriously now than in the past. CISA does offer a lot of its same services that it offers to state and locals, to campaigns. We don't necessarily get as many campaigns taking us up on it, in large part because they don't necessarily have the infrastructure really established to have dedicated CISO teams, particularly for the smaller campaigns at the local level. But we have done trainings. We provided best practices guides to campaigns and political organizations that provided out to all of their campaign infrastructure. So I think we've chipped away at this problem, and I'm not going to say it's been solved, because nation states are eager to compromise political officials and their interlocutors, and so they will continue to be top priority targets for nation states and other actors. But significant progress has been made over the past 4 years in this area.
Let's talk for a moment about ransomware, which is understandably commanding a lot of attention. This is something that gained attention in the headlines recently, but CISA has been beating this drum for a long time. So DHS and CISA have been piloting new technology with state and local governments throughout the year. And one such pilot that is interesting to me is the endpoint detection and response pilot for elections infrastructure. Can you talk about that program, how widely that's been installed, and have you caught anything interesting?
Sure. So to provide some context about that program, we have operated a system for several years, actually going back before 2016, but we ramped it up after 2016 to provide network sensors at the perimeter of all election systems. So today we call them Albert sensors, in part because we have a similar system protecting the federal civilian agencies called Einstein. So we've got these Albert sensors. They're deployed at the perimeters of systems. They will provide NetFlow and intrusion detection support to all 50 states, and then a couple of hundred counties and a small number of private sector entities that actually operate voter registration databases on behalf of states. And so that provides us some insights in terms of what's happening on election infrastructure, and also allows us to very quickly, once we have new indicators of compromise, see if their activity is happening anyplace else in the country. What we've tried to do this year, as you've highlighted, is to work on a pilot program for a new system, which would provide much better insight, deeper into networks. So actually enhanced, advanced endpoint systems on high-valued servers and workstations of election officials. That pilot has only started about 6 months ago. We're ramping up to about 10,000 hosts that we will cover across the country by the end of the year. Haven't had significant new findings yet, but anytime we get an indicator on any of our systems, or we get a downgraded indicator from our colleagues in the intelligence community, we will feed that into these systems. And so that may alert only at a local level, and they may be able to take a quick action to resolve any potential issue. But we think once it's fully deployed, our level of insights into the election sector will be both really profound and allow us to take aggressive action, spot trends earlier on, and ultimately provide enhanced level of protection, both against ransomware and a much broader array of cyber threats that states are facing. Ransomware tends to be one that we talk about a lot, in part because states can relate more. When we talk about Russia targeting them, local election officials will oftentimes not think that that's a real threat to their ability to operate an election. But they have seen state after state, county after county be impacted by ransomware events that have taken them offline for days, weeks at a time, and that's real. And so it is something that they can see, something that's really tangible to them, that can have a real dramatic effect on their ability to operate. And so they have taken us up on our offer to provide them with both the tools and advice and guidance on how to address it.
In terms of the EDR pilot, you mentioned full deployment. What's the timeline for that, out of curiosity?
So I think by the end of the year, we'll get the initial pilot done of the 10,000 hosts covered. But that was a pilot, and I think based upon its findings, we'll be working with our congressional overseers to see whether something like that can be expanded more broadly.
Okay.
And also, I should say that that's a pilot that we're operating. Many states have invested their own resources in enhancing their security. So there are many states that are actually using similar endpoint detection systems. It tends to be bigger, more well-funded states, but it is something that we would like to see deployed nationwide over time. And so that's something that we're going to be looking at based upon the results of the first year's pilot.
Okay. I wanted to ask one more question from the audience. And this one's about voting machines. And, I'm not sure if he specifically means machines you actually cast the ballot on, tabulating, but can you talk about CISA's role in auditing the security of those two kinds of machines and what you found?
So we don't audit the security of machines. So the way the system currently works is the Election Assistance Commission, which was a independent commission formed by the Help America Vote Act in the early 2000s. They establish standards for voting machines, and then there is auditing against those standards. And in addition, there are voluntary security standards that are created through the Election Assistance Commission that we work with. What we have done is provide something called critical product evaluation, where we go to and we've done this with each of the major election vendors, where they provide us with new technology that they have not yet deployed, and provide it to us, and we will do kind of red teaming against that equipment to try to identify vulnerabilities or weaknesses that can be addressed before the system is deployed in operational use. And so that's where we think our kind of real role is, because we don't have a real regulatory role. We don't do forensics on systems often. Now, if there is a potential compromise on a state election system, so not necessarily voting machines, but if there is a compromise to an election system and the state or local asks for our assistance, we will get in there and we will look to see what happened, how it happened, what was compromised, what they did they exfiltrate data, did they attempt to change information, and so we can provide as full report as possible on the nature of what we've seen as part of that response.
Gotcha. Okay, we're at a half an hour, Brandon. I really want to say thank you for stopping by to talk. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before I let everyone go. I want to plug The Outcome, which is MIT Technologies Review's pop-up newsletter on election integrity and security. And you can subscribe at technologyreview.com. We have a newsletters link at the top of the page. To replay this broadcast, we should have a URL on this screen. It's ter.li/spotlight today. This is our final Spotlight On for this calendar year. We'll be back in the new year. We have new episodes coming up on tech and sports, digital currency, quantum computing, and more. So thank you, everyone. And thanks especially to Brandon for having this conversation with us. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure I will be hearing more from you throughout the month.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.